And hello. Hi, happy Sunday. Happy December 15th. Happy grief part two. If that even makes sense to say happy grief part two. Um, I am Coach Yolanda, international spiritual life coach, certified international spiritual life coach, certified birth doula, lactation uh, support. What else? Meditation guide. What else? Reiki master. What else? Mother of four. What else? Grandmother to one. What else? And a whole lot of other stuff um, that I don't even know yet. How about that? A whole lot of things that I don't even know yet, but I'm here to discover. I am happy that you have joined us live or during the replay for Mama Meditations. It's 1:33, but for me that's early. I was about to get caught up in reading something, and the time was ticking by. So I set up early. I did my opening process that I do before I come on. I don't know about y'all. It could just be me, but it just seems very, very dark. Although my face is illuminated, the background just seems very, very dark. So I hope it is rendering differently for you, but for me, it just seems very shaded and shadowy in the back. And if that is true for you, I apologize. Now that I say that, there is a light out. I'm also getting a notification that the signal is not strong. What is that about? Whatever is going on, just stop it. Ancestors handle that. I can't do anything about that right now. So I'm gonna ask my people, as I call my spirit team, my people, get on that. Whatever that is, let's handle it. I trust and I hope that you have had time to think about your own grief as we opened it up last week. This is Power 24. Last week we talked about grief. I felt it important to not just leave it where we left it. Now, I don't go back and watch the episodes, but as I was talking last week, I felt like we could do a part two because this is the end of this year. We are being intentional about what we carry over into the next year. And if we are walking around with a mask of grief, meaning our grief is being masked as something else, I would really love for us to get to a point where we don't feel like we need to do that. One of the things that I read last week from The Body Knows the Score was people can never get better without knowing what they know and feeling what they feel. So if we're not feeling what we feel and we're not trusting what we know to be true, then where is the healing happening? And if the healing isn't happening, then why are we going into a new experience of 2025 with old stuff? Why are we doing that? And also from The Body Knows the Score, the sources of our suffering are the lies we tell ourselves. So why are we lying to ourselves? We don't need to do any of those things. Y'all see that I had to MacGyver my glasses because I have so much to read today, and my new glasses do not arrive until tomorrow. So I had to do what I had to do in order to prepare for today. Um, so if you see me looking to the left, it's because I have notes everywhere because I don't want to miss anything. I am trusting that as we are having conversations with grief, that you will take care of yourself, that if something is coming up that you are not prepared to talk about, think about, write about, or address, that you table that. Maybe you don't watch last week's meditation or today. Maybe you step out. We'll be back to other programming next week. I haven't had chance to change this slide, but I do want to go over it and share it. So first we talked about changes. Then we talk about grief. We were going to talk about creative power, but this week we're going to talk about grief as well. Next week we're going to talk about new beginnings and what that may look like for each and every single one of us. And of course, we're going to end with completion because all things should end with some form of ritual of completion. Sometimes things end with a ritual of completion that we don't understand or we don't like, but all things come to an end. And so my time in the social media environment of YouTube is coming to an end. I may still keep the channel, but I will not be doing my lives from YouTube in the coming year. All of that is going to take place in the Evolve. Why is my stuff not showing? Here we go. In the Evolve community. That is the website. The name of the community is the Evolve. There are different experiences within that community. It is free to join. And then there are other things that membership subscription will gather and gain. And I'm still toying with the idea if Mama Meditations is reserved for the subscription service or if it's something that happens in the valley. I gotta pray on that. I gotta pray on that because it does take up a lot of mental and emotional energy for me. It may seem easy, but whew, when I'm dealing with my own stuff, dealing with other people's stuff as a spiritual life coach. I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, all those roles that I talked about in the beginning, they all come with responsibility. And so to add to that responsibility, I have to make sure that I'm doing it in a balanced way. So I'm not quite sure how Mama Meditations is going to look in 2025 in terms of how it's going to flow. I can tell you it's only going to be on this platform. It's only going to be on this platform. And it may take on more of a group coaching dynamic. But we're going to pray on it and see what happens. And see what happens. But for today, as we are talking about grief, I wanted to talk about how our grief, because it is part of the human experience that everyone will go through. Now, you may be resistant to grieve. You may want to grieve in ways that are not authentic to the human experience. I think we all grieve differently, but there are particular aspects of the grieving process that I believe that we all enter into. Some of us, try as we may, um, might try to control that journey, try to control that process as much as possible. I know that's something that I tried to do. It did not work out well when I tried to do that. I did learn some things, however, but there are particular things, particularly in the Western way of living, which I am coming to you live from the little tiny state of Delaware in the United States of America. I'm not quite sure where you are seeing me from. Um, but when I say Western way, I really want to, make sure that we understand that there is a way in which in this country, with this diverse culture, how we deal with emotions. I was just watching, first of all, I've been crying since for the past 2 weeks, off and on, off and on, off and on. I'm comfortable with crying. Other people may not be comfortable with crying. And it is my experience that within our culture, this Western culture, there is a discomfort with crying. And so I was just watching Queer Eye. For those of you who are not familiar with Queer Eye, it started years ago where it was just Queer Eye for straight men. And now it's Queer Eye for everyone, where they come into someone's life and everyone, there's 5 of them, they all have a different experience. They all have different expertise in things and they make over someone's life. And so I'm watching this, and it's men and it's women and it's mothers and sisters and daughters. Like it's just a full gamut of humans. And it's what was interesting to me is those from different cultures, different meaning not from the United States, not native to the United States, the way in which the expressions of emotions is just different. It's just different. And I'm going to read about that in a minute. Um, but for those of you who may not be comfortable with emotions or with feeling or expressing the way that you are feeling, you might be trying to control your grief journey. And grief can come as it comes from whatever it comes from. We typically associate grief with death or loss of a loved one, or loss of something impactful or important. But grief can come from many things. Sometimes you are moving into something amazing, great, and wonderful, and you still are grieving the thing that you are leaving. Something very great and wonderful. Hey, Miss Marissa, happy Sunday to you. Yes, and that was one of the things that one of the families on the program was from Guatemala. And one of the things that the mother said is, we cry all the time. We are criers. And so, yeah, um, you know, in particular environments, you know what someone is going through because there's not this need to mask what they are, what, the person may be feeling. And so, for those of us who try to control every single experience that we have, meaning we're going to control the way in which we express ourselves or what people see, it's important for us to know that we have no idea when someone is going through a period of grief or when they are not. But we can rest assured that all beings grieve in their own way because we are connected, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, because we are connected to people, places, things. When those things end or when they change or when it's no longer serving us in the way that we desire, we grieve it. You might grieve for a day, you might grieve for an hour, you may grieve for the rest of your life. But I believe that it is not only important for us to get comfortable with our grief, but to recognize that our grief has a way of opening us up spiritually, unlike any other experience. Yes, love can do that. And grief really is love. Grief is really an expression of love. I don't know of many people who grieve things that they don't like or that were causing them harm. Sometimes we can, because I do believe that we can also be addicted to trauma, addicted to pain, addicted to things that we get familiar with. But grief is really another form of expression of love. Right. That's something, woo, I'm sure that that's something that you have had to learn being in another culture. Is that the things that I used to do to protect myself are no longer necessary. But when you've done it so long, when you've done it for so long, it can be a hard habit to break. Yeah, grief is really love. And so, why wouldn't we want to fully express the love that we have for people, for places, for experiences, even if in our grieving, we are also angry, we also have guilt, we also have all of these other emotions that are fighting to get to the surface. And I'm going to read from some of the things that have helped me in my grief journey. And when I say journey, I mean the trip is not over. When I say journey, imagine if you had a big old backpack filled with bricks and you had to climb mountains, get down in valleys, go over rocks. The journey is not over. As a matter of fact, there have been so many things that I have been crying over. The show I was just watching, crying over. Um, Friday, whoo, child. After a week of taking care of other, 2 weeks of taking care of other people, um, all I wanted to do, all I wanted to experience Friday evening was to just come home and lay my burdens down and just rest and relax. And I walked into my house and it broke me. Um, there was something mechanical going on in the house that really needed emergency response. And I did not have it. And at that point, it broke me. I broke. Friday, I just broke. I said, all right, this is, I don't have not one shred of anything within me to deal with, address, or even respond. And the one shred that I did, and I reached out for support, and it made me feel 10 times worse. And I just literally balled up in a ball, got under the covers, and just kept praying, just let me go to sleep. I just need to go to sleep. Please just let me go to sleep. I was a broken being on Friday. I was a little bit better yesterday. I'm still, coming around because it's Sunday and I know that I have mama meditations that always makes me feel lighter. But baby, I was broken on Friday. And I really, really had reached a point of surrender, which is not a bad thing. And we'll talk about that. But you talk about grief, man, listen, Friday was it for me. As they say, the hey my love, how are you? Friday was the straw that did not just break the camel's back, it broke everything. And so I'm going to read a couple of things and then we'll talk a little bit about them. I'm also going to put the title from where I'm reading because I know y'all tired of me holding up books and it's all crooked. But because we are talking about how grief can create a spiritual awakening unlike any other experience. And I have to say, I would not be sitting here in front of this microphone today if it was not for a particular relationship with my own grief that I'm still amazed by. Still amazed by. Okay, so I'm going to be reading from the Healing Wisdom of Africa. What part did I want to read? Y'all see everything is tabbed up. Hmm. Whew. Okay. In this book, there are particular sections that, in my opinion, are dedicated to sadness and to grief. If you are going through a healing journey, I would suggest this as one of the options to support you. So, whew, Father Some says, grief is the enemy of denial. What? Grief is the enemy of denial. Similar to what I read last week and this week about the lies that we tell ourselves, which is what suffering is, grief is the enemy of denial. An elder once told me, my tears say that my soul has heard something about the other world. My goodness, my God, grief being that thing that opens us up in ways that nothing else really can open us up. I also want to read this. There are whew, countless aspects of human experience that water rituals affect in a healing way. And in the context of this book, grief is looked upon as a healing ritual. Is that not just beautiful to think of grief in that way? In indigenous Africa, one cannot conceive of a community that does not grieve. In my village, people cry every day until grief is restored in the West as the starting place where the modern man and woman might find peace. The culture will continue to abuse and ignore the power of water and in turn will be fascinated with fire. So, because the elements that are around us: water, air, fire, mineral. Did I forget one? Earth being mineral. Um, Water is connected to crying, crying connected to grief, grief held in a symbolic way as one of the most healing journeys that you can ever go on. Grief is not only expressed in tears, but also in anger, rage, frustration, and sadness. And so when the fascination with fire is anger, another fascination with fire is rage. And boy, are we seeing that now in our culture. The amount of rage, the amount of anger that is prevalent in society right now can only be can only be extinguished with water. Water being connected to the healing properties of our tears. One must ask, why tears, the softest expression of grief, are not as acceptable in the modern world as are anger and rage? I say this because to indigenous Africans, emotions are sacred. I feel like I want to throw this book at the world. Emotions are sacred. To villagers, it looks as if the West is uncomfortable with tears because one cannot argue verbally, logically against this kind of emotion. When someone is in the throes of sadness and tears, that's really not the time for you to tell them, oh, you're wrong for feeling that way, or why are you crying? I know we say it a lot. I, have even had to stop myself in the childcare setting when children are crying and I'm asking them, why are you crying? Crying is our first language. Every single being that comes into existence, the very first language that we use to communicate before we learn any other word are our tears, are our cries. The very first words we speak when we come into this world as humans is a cry. Why would that be wrong? We have been told it is wrong. And so, if we as a collective can't cry with one another, and the only thing that we seem to be able to do is be enraged with one another and angry with one another, how are we supposed to get to this? How are we supposed to get to that soft expression of grief? Emotions have the tendency to spread from person to person, and therefore, social control to the Western mind is being risked with any display of emotion. It's why we tell boys that they shouldn't cry. It's why we try to stop children from crying. It's why, we get uncomfortable when other people are crying because it's one of the most authentic expressions that we have. I always say that anger is sadness on fire. A lot of times we see people angry. They're not really angry, they're sad. But if they can mask it with anger, then maybe they won't be seen as weak. That's something that we learn. That's not something that we come into this world with. We come into this world authentically with our tears. When we're hungry, we cry out. When we're wet, we cry out. When we are uncomfortable, we cry out. So if it is our first language, if it is something that we are just inherently doing when we know we are out of balance, why would we, as full fledged adults who have a certain level of mental maturity, why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we engage in a practice of recognizing that our grief can be the pathway to a spiritual transformation unlike any other experience? Can love be that? Yes, but grief is love. Grief is a form of expression of love. When we lose something or something is no longer with us and we're going through that grieving process, what we are saying is, I loved this person. I loved this place. I loved this thing. I loved this experience. And because it has ended, my heart is broken. Whew, okay. There are several other nuggets. And I think Wednesday, when we do our reflections in the evolved community, there is a grief ritual that I would really love to partake in. I also am strongly considering redoing a course that I held last year called A Time to Cry for Black Women. I loved doing it last year, and I think we're at a point in time, or at least I know I'm at a point in time where I'm ready. I'm ready for that lesson again. Second book that I'm going to be reading from, because there is a theme here, is Yesterday I Cried by Ian Van Zant. Um, there are particular chapters in this book, and I think out of all of her books, I could be wrong because I can't even lie and say that I've read every single book cover to cover. There's so many of her works that I have yet to read, but this one in particular, I think, gives an understanding of the journey of Ian Van Zant becoming Ian Van Zant. And so there are lessons. There are 19, I'm going to say 19 lessons within this book. I'm going to read from lesson 13. What's the lesson when you lose someone you really love? Hmm. What's the lesson when you lose someone that you really love? And we talked a little bit about this last week, how sometimes as humans, we have a hard time. We've been talking about this for a while, but as humans, how we sometimes have a hard time letting go, yet everything has a beginning and an ending. And so she writes, there always comes a time of elimination. The earth sheds each year. The trees and flowers let go of their identity. As the old identity dies, a new identity is born. The body sheds constantly. Some of it happens invisibly, so naturally and silently that we do not realize it is happening. The heart and the spirit also shed. Just think about that for a minute that your heart and your spirit also go through an elimination process. They shed the emotions and experiences that we no longer need. They shed the things that stunt our growth. This too is an invisible process. Yet, because of the energy involved, the emotional energy, we often feel the emotional and spiritual shedding. It feels as if we are dying. We are. Just like the flowers and the trees, we are dying to an old identity. This shedding or death is not the end of us, it is the beginning. And one of the things that I have learned in my grieving process is the tears that I shed, the turmoil that I go through, the suffering that I feel can be so strong that I forget that something new is happening as well. Every time there is an ending, there is a beginning. And sometimes we get so wound up in the ending that we forget to acknowledge that something new is beginning. Because of the spiritual and emotional energy attached to the loss, to the grieving, we forget everything that I'm going through right now is part of a new beginning. Whew. Ah! I think last week I talked about how we had butterflies in some of our classrooms. And when we think about the process of a caterpillar becoming a butterfly or a moth, we should not forget the moths. Moths may not be as pretty as butterflies, but we always talk about the caterpillars that are turning into, butterflies. What about the caterpillars that are turning into moths? It is a bloody, gory process. And the caterpillar goes into that process not knowing if they are going to live or not. That was the part of having those experiences in our classroom that I don't think we did well as adults to share with the children. Now, they were some of our younger children, and they may not, you know, understand that whole process, but it's my belief the more that we show children the process, the more they're able to retain that information. And so perhaps we needed to do a better job to explain that not all of the caterpillars are going to make it. Not all of the caterpillars make it, but they still go through the process. of shedding their old identity because something new is beginning. Whew, it makes my head hurt because I know that with all of the crying and the gnashing and the whatever I've been going through over the past couple of weeks, I am still not creating enough excitement around the thing that is beginning. Like it makes me realize that I am human. It makes me realize that my grieving is not just a place that I desire to be stuck in, but it is or that I desire to be passed through. I don't want to go through either of those extremes where I'm stuck in it or I pass through it. That I want to live through it because at some point, hopefully at some point, we start to realize something new is beginning here. And when I came home on Friday, and I tell you, I was like a broken shell. I wasn't thinking about no new beginnings, but yesterday I was, this morning I started to get used to the idea of something new is happening here. However, that old identity is dying. And it deserves to be acknowledged. It deserves light. It deserves words. It deserves an expression. How dare I shed this old identity and not cry for it? How dare I act like it didn't mean anything to me? How dare I act like where I have poured myself into that I could just walk away from it is going to be easy. And Marissa, you just said something, and I'm trying to avoid it because that also makes me want to cry. um, because I love those babies, and every day I go into that place and I realize this is the last time I'm going to have this particular experience on this particular day because other experiences are waiting for me. And so I love those babies. and I'm not just talking about the children. I'm talking about their parents because they all, younger than me. Um and they feel like my babies too. And so, oh hey Miss Giselle, how are you, my love? But yeah, everything sheds, everything has an elimination period. And we have been in Western culture, we have been programmed to believe that when things end or things are being eliminated, it's a horrible thing. It's a terrible thing. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. But if you want to do yourself a favor by reading The Healing Wisdom of Africa, you will get a different perspective on how many indigenous cultures, when it's a sacred rite of passage. It's a sacred rite of passage. If we started to look at some of those things, some of the things in our lives that we are being called to do or whom we're being called to be, as we are going through a sacred rite of passage, if, a job is coming to an end, there is a sacred rite of passage. Something else is beginning. If a relationship comes to an end, that is a sacred rite of passage. If your relationship with someone ends because they have transitioned into another plane, that is a sacred rite of passage. I know because our emotions are tied up in it, it's hard to look at it that way. There isn't a person in my life that I have loved that has transitioned that I did not wish could come back or were still here. There's not one person that I have ever loved in my life, and some people that I haven't really typically loved. But if, somebody gave me some magic beans and said, okay, here are 4 beans, you get to bring back 4 people, I would jump at that chance. And without fail, I could tell you who they are. And this is not to say, oh well, somebody died. That's just a sacred right, and we just, we need to deal with it in a more, healthy way. We need to deal with it in the way that we deal with it. But if we ain't dealing with it because we think we can rush through it, if we're not dealing with it because we're not talking about it, or we're masking ourselves and our sadness, then we're going to get sick. I don't know any other way to say it, but we're going to be sick mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And so, one of the last things that I want to read, we're going to take some time, because for me, this book has been most helpful in terms of me seeing why some things had to happen, or why some things happened in the way that they've happened. And so Caroline Mace is I want to, talk about her correctly. She is a medical intuitive, author of many books. I've had the pleasure of hearing her speak in person twice, and both of them have been extraordinary experiences for me. Something that I needed to hear at the right time in the right place. Um, and so it wasn't until I read this book that I really fully allowed myself to step into not only my grief, but the purpose of it all. The purpose of it all. I can hear Anthony Hamilton singing "The Point of It All." The point of it all. So, one of the things that Caroline Mace says in this book is, when you are working well with your energy, you are also making the best expression of your personal power. I call this living in accord with your sacred contract. It is her belief that every single being has a sacred contract with the universe, that we were brought here for a purpose, that we were brought here to answer particular questions like, why am I here? What is my purpose? What is my function? What is my service to the world, to the universe? What is my divine call? She also believes that there are stages of a sacred contract. And I believe that I was already through some of these stages. Doesn't mean that they're linear. But for me personally, I believe that I was already through some of these stages. And it wasn't until I read this that I was like, oh, okay. She writes that Evelyn Underhill in the book Mysticism says the enlightenment process can go into 5 stages, because we're human and we love things to be in order. She called them the stages of awakening, purification, illumination, the dark night of the soul, and divine union. That those were the stages of our sacred contract. That's how we come into new experiences, like, oh, that's why all that happened. Oh, that's why I was an emotional wreck. Oh, that's why those things had to be removed out of my life. And one of the very first stages, as Caroline Mace writes, is that there is some kind of contact that we have with the divine. It's a moment of connection between you and the divine. And more often than not, it happens in a moment of grief, when something strikes you or hits you so profound that you're not calling your girlfriend to talk about it. You're not, you are really, it's just you and the God of your understanding. That's how I felt on Friday. I did pick up the phone and I called someone and I was like, I need your help. And they were a whole bunch of nothing but help, anything but help. And when I hung the phone up, I was like, there is nothing but me and God in this moment. And I surrender. I give up. I don't know what else to do. I'm tired. I don't have anything left. And so it doesn't mean that these stages only happen once. They can happen all at one time. It is all about how you identify, but there is something that I believe that each and every single one of us goes through in this human experience, where it brings us to our knees, if that makes sense. It just stops and seems to take the air out of our lungs. We will all be introduced to the divine through ordinary and extraordinary experiences, even if spiritual messengers are not involved. I know for a lot of us, we think about um, Noah. It, was told to build the ark, and it came with a spiritual message. Oh my God, why can I not think? Moses and the Ten Commandments, the burning bush was like, yo, I gotta holler at you for a minute. Like, we think about these profound spiritual messengers or messages happening, and when they don't happen to us, we think, well, I guess I'm not on a spiritual path, or I guess I'm not having a spiritual journey because I don't see no burning bushes. I don't have, rocks crying out to me. I don't have the things that we seem to identify with some spiritual experience. There's no beaming light coming down. I didn't have an out of body experience. Sometimes it's in the day to day living. For instance, the divine influence is evidence when a cluster of disasters occurs in a remarkably short period of time and reroutes your life. I guarantee that every single person listening to this can be like, oh, yeah, I've had that happen, where it just seems like every single thing is going wrong. That's how I felt on Friday. It was the straw that broke the camel's back, my back, and everything else in my life. It felt like I was a puppet and somebody cut the strings and I just fell. That can be your initial contact where all of the other noise is erased and eliminated, and it's just you and your God and the God of your understanding. That is usually when we start to open ourselves to aligning with our sacred contract. Number two, once you've been awakened, you can't do things the way that you used to do them, right? It really is like I can't think the way that I used to think. I can't speak the way that I used to speak. My perspective on things is so different because now I'm awake. Now I see what I needed to see. And again, oftentimes that happens in times of grief where everything is different. You have lost greatly. And so your mind is not operating in the way that it used to. Your heart is not operating in the way it used to. The stuff that you used to be able to do or put up with, can't do that anymore. You just can't. Um, Something happened to me on Friday where I recognized it the second I did it or said it, I realized this is not old you. This is new you. What is saying things that old you would have never said. And as the kids say, I stood on business. Like I said something and it was so definitive that everybody around me just got quiet, and it was kind of like we have never heard her. And it wasn't loud, it wasn't combative, it just was definitive. And it was so evident to me. I was like, oh, should I apologize? Because I recognize this is a new version of me that they may not recognize just yet. And all I kept hearing is, you have nothing to apologize for. This is who you are. This is who you're becoming. These are the boundaries that you now have to set. And so, number two is you heeding the call. This transformative thing has happened. Often it comes through disaster or through grief. And now you feel forever change. Like, I can't go back. I can't go back to what I used to do, what I used to say, and who I used to be. So again, you're aligning with that sacred divine contract that you have, that you've always had, that has pulled you into existence. Number three, this is one that I didn't expect. And until I read this book, I was like, oh my gosh, there is a renaming. You assume a new name or role with spiritual significance. Now, I literally was given a new spiritual name, a new spiritual identity. It was whispered in my ear, and the minute it was, I was like, it felt like I answered. I answered. I don't know if any of you have had the experience. I know sometimes being a Black girl, most of us have this experience because our families love to give us unique names. Not that my name is all that unique, but for whatever reason, people still will mispronounce. I've been called Yolanda. I've been called Londa. So many different variations of Yolanda, which to me is just so simple. And there were times when I would get upset if somebody, mispronounced my name, but I would still answer because I know that they were talking to me, right? This type of spiritual experience where someone calls you by your given name, you might find that you don't answer as rapidly as you used to because this new identity that is forming, that name might seem foreign, or the role you used to play. So it may not literally be your name, but the way in which people used to address you doesn't feel appropriate anymore. You can almost hear your brain saying, "Who are you speaking to? I know you're not talking to me like after what I just experienced." And I can say that even before I was given my spiritual name, I recognize that the way in which people may have joked with me in the past, I couldn't do anymore. Particularly, I would say a year or two after Isaiah passed away. So we're talking 2014, 2015. I just couldn't be in the same environments. I couldn't play the same kind of role in friendships. I couldn't play the same kind of role in family dynamics. I just could not because I wasn't that version of me. I wasn't that version of me. And so this may also be your experience in your family. Like if you're the baby in your family and everybody talks to you like you still 12, and as you are becoming more spiritually aware about who you are, it starts to get on your nerves. You're like, I don't know I don't know who you're speaking about. I don't know who you're talking to. Because the other thing that happens is your environment may start to change. And therefore, the things that you used to do or the things that used to excite, they just don't anymore. And so the role that you have played does not align with this sacred contract that you have energetically signed. Because I'm telling you that grief will break you open and it will create in you a new, I just lost the word, a new pathology, a new way of being, a new way of being. That's what I meant, not pathology. It will create a new paradigm, a new everything. Number 4. The other thing that I love about this book is that Caroline Mace gives examples by using well known spiritual deities. She goes through the life of Jesus to show how Jesus went through all of these steps. She goes through the life of Muhammad. She goes through the life of, I want to say, let me get it right, because I don't want to say Caroline Mace did something that she didn't do. Definitely Jesus, definitely Muhammad, the Buddha, things that we have been taught and told our whole life. There's a great way of breaking it down in this book. So you can see it's not just you, it's not just me, it's not just Jesus, it's just not just Muhammad. It is all of us in this spiritual experience because all of us have had heart opening, life changing, transformative experiences. And so, number 4, there's an assignment. Throughout life, you encounter extraordinary opportunities and challenges that require continual transitions and adjustments. I used to call myself, particularly during the pandemic, the pivot princess, because it felt like every week I had to pivot into another identity. And many of you that may, resonate in terms of who am I going to be today? Or what is life going to require of me? And so your assignment means that you are either creating something that you haven't created in the past, you are presenting in a way that you may not have presented in the past, your perspective is expanding. And so you find yourself saying things. Isn't it a wonderful experience when you can see the spiritual maturity where something that may have gotten your attention in the past, now you're like, I don't have time for it. I'm on assignment. I'm in the throes of something right here and right now that is so great that thing that used to get my attention no longer gets it. We used to have a saying in Intervisions where everybody's relationship, if you came into the Intervisions Institute of Spiritual Development in a relationship, the likelihood that you were going to still be in that relationship when you came out was almost zero, because the spiritual transformation happens and it really does test your relationships with other people. And grief, when they say the number one cause of divorce is money or, infidelity, I would gather to say it's probably unexpressed emotions, things that build up over time, over time, over time, while people are transforming. And then the person transforms into this new version. The old stuff doesn't work. And because we've never talked about it and because we've never dealt with it, we don't know what to do with it. And because my heart assignment is now different, we're out of balance. We're no longer connected on the level that we used to be connected on. It happens. And so we used to joke about, when people would come into Intervisions, like, oh, you thought you were in a relationship halfway through, because it was a year-long program. Halfway through that year, it was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to sustain this relationship anymore because I'm changing and I have a new assignment. My heart, my soul is prepared to do something different. And only the strongest of relationships can be sustained when this heart assignment, this sacred contract, is now changing. Whew. I had to put my book down. And number 5, which is, like I said, where I was on Friday, it's surrender. It is surrender. Let me read. Whew. You are giving ongoing tests that ask the question, which world will you choose to follow? That of the divine or that of earth? Ay, ay, ay. It is where I find myself right now. It's where I find myself right now asking that question. Who am I going to follow? Am I going to jump off the mountain knowing that God is going to catch me? Or am I just going to continue to do what the earth tells me, what to do, which is the same old get up, go do this, come home, make myself something to eat, sit in front of the TV or read something, and hopefully I'm in the bed by 7:30 because I've been exhausted. Like, what do we surrender to? Abraham's son Isaac meant everything to him, yet when God told Abraham to sacrifice the boy, he set out to do what was asked. Although the command was the most difficult order of his life and clearly seemed to go against his best interest, Abraham chose to follow the voice of the divine. Now, I am not telling anybody to sacrifice your loved ones because you heard God say, all right, you got to take a knife and place, what you love the most on the altar. It's similar to, the baby that was being claimed by two mothers, and King Solomon said, all right, well, we're going to cut the baby down the middle so it could be shown who was really willing to do what was necessary for that baby. One person was like, go ahead and cut the baby because they had their own agenda. The other person's like, you know what? I'd rather that baby live, even if it means it's not with me. Surrendering can be one of the hardest things that you do in your sacred contract. And when it comes to grieving, particularly when you are grieving something you love and you want to hold on to it, letting it go, can feel like you are literally ripping your heart out of your body. Abraham's response is indicative of the faith you need to have that your contract will never ask more of you than you are able to give. You will never finish the process of choice and surrender until you have surrendered all to the will of the divine. Just when you feel you have reached your limits, you are pushed further. Perhaps your career or relationship seems to decline faster, for instance, the harder you try to revive it. How many times? It's like when you see someone in quicksand and they tell you don't fight because the more you fight, the more that quicksand is going to suck you under energetically. It is the same thing when we refuse to surrender to what is. The more you try to hold on, the harder it is going to be to hold on to it. Ay, ay, ay. Ay, ay, ay. And I know that the question is always asked, well, how do I know what the risk is? How do I know? Yes, the internal battle. It's like, well, how do I know? You got to trust. That's what real faith is. And while I'm not telling anyone to create a great sacrifice in your life where you're cutting off everything, and we've seen people who have done that. As I sold everything and I'm going to, live in a van, and not really have a plan. It's like, oh, I'm going to live off the earth. Or we see it happening more and more as people want to get out of this matrix, as people want to get out of whatever this is going on, which is really paradigms are being pulled down, and things are shifting. But if you do it without a plan, you know that's extreme risk. Nowhere did the divine ever say, don't plan. Nowhere did the divine ever say, oh, now that's something. Did I do that? I did something to my light, y'all. Remember I said when we started that it was really, really dark? And I told my ancestor team, do something about the darkness. Well, they did something all right. I may not like what they did, but they did it. Let me see. Did I do that? I think I did that. I did. Um, Your faith and your belief in the God of your understanding may require you to say or take you to places where you can't even hear what the earthly being is saying. Where your surrender is happening willingly or unwillingly. You're either a willing participant or it's going to happen. And then it really feels like things have been snatched from you instead of the surrender that can happen in a lot of different ways. I don't want to suggest that again we just give everything up and we just stop living. It's more about your perspective. And one of the quotes that I have been saying as of late, God, if this is your will, then allow me to see it in a way that I'm not resistant to all of the good things that you have for me. God, if I'm stepping out of something that I love, something that has been, supportive of me over these past couple of years, because you have something greater for me, then let me be willing to see it that way. Let me be willing to see it. So when I came home on Friday, where's my, because I feel like I'm about to cry. Oh, when I came home on Friday, I made a decision that I may sell my house and move. I've just gotten to the point where I'm tired, y'all. I am physically, emotionally tired. And so I'm strongly considering moving. And that means moving away from my family, moving away from grandbaby girl. Like, oh gosh, the thought of it was just too scary, but also very real. Now that was Friday. Yesterday, I started to warm up to the idea. Today, I'm warming up to it even more, even though it has caused me to be crying like a baby. I'm crying like a baby, but my shoulders are starting to feel lighter. Um, and I love my house. Like, if you've never been here, you would know that everyone who has come into this house says very similar things. It's so peaceful here. Oh my goodness, the energy here is amazing. It is no longer feeling that way for me. And so, as much as I love my house, and as much as I have been able to do great work here, I'm really at the point where I'm ready to let go. And that's exactly what I said on Friday when I walked in here, expecting it to be my sanctuary. And it was just one more thing that I had to take care of, and I didn't have the capacity to do it. And my capacity to take care of my house is decreasing as I get older. And I don't know that I've ever sat and told y'all about the story of this house and how it came about. It really was Isaiah led me to this house. The spirits led me to this house. And so for me to feel that way about it and to say our time together may be coming to an end really is the beginning of a grieving process um, that I don't know that I'm ready for. But my prayer has been, God, if this is what I need to do because you have something greater for me, then let it be. Then let it be. And so each and every single one of us, and I truly believe the time period that we are in and what we are seeing is going to require all of us to figure out what is your sacred contract calling for you to do? And is it coming through with grief? Back in November, when there was this sort of collective grief that we were all experiencing, and we were all making these decisions, and I don't think making decisions when you're emotional are all that bad. Sometimes it can be the exact point. It's like you needed to get emotional before you were able to be definitive about the decision. Sometimes we waffle on things because we're not emotional enough about them. So I'm not always one to say, don't be in the throes of emotions when you make a choice. But I also think you have to know who you are. And I know for me, my I'm impulsive and my reactions to things can be very impulsive. But if I don't waver the next day, or the next day, or like if there's no wavering, if I don't say to myself, okay, you overreacted and that's not how you really feel. If I consistently feel a particular way about my decision, I know that that's the decision that I need to make. I also, employ a lot of different spiritual tools. I'm not going to show it because it's special and it's sacred to me, but this is my pendulum, one of my pendulums. I pulled that out and I was like, let's get to the real deal. I have my altar. I go to my people, which is what I call my ancestors. Like, we all have to have spiritual support that may not be our friends, our family, um, me. Like, in order for us to have this communication with the divine, we got to get divine, right? In order for us to hear the voice of the God of our understanding, we got to shut all that other stuff out. And so, if you are going through that process where you are silencing other people's opinions, where you are silencing other people's plans and paths, and you are really allowing your grief to guide you, because your grief can guide you. Sometimes people will tell you, oh, don't be making those decisions because you're heartbroken. Baby, my heart being broken is exactly what led me to where I'm at now. If my heart had not been broken, I wouldn't be sitting right here today. If my heart had not been broken, my heart could have never been healed. And so, as heartbreaking as it is for us to express the things that we need to express, and I hope the things that I've read today resonate with you as we come to the end of the year, to say, I'm not taking things into this new experience because I'm shedding that stuff. If I am getting signs and messages that this is the end, or this is the process of elimination for me in this particular experience, whether it is a job, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a relationship with your family, if you really have to get to a point, or have gotten to a point where you recognize this can no longer continue, this can no longer stand because I'm becoming someone new, then I would offer that you allow your grief to be that part of your spiritual journey that breaks you wide open and allows you to get very silent in your communication with the divine, to say, I know you might be requiring me to do some big things, but that's because you have big things for me. That's because there is something greater. I always like to imagine my sacred contract has a lot of stuff in fine print, because if I were to see it and read it, I'd be like, nope, not going to do it, which is probably why I keep having this experience of glasses breaking, because I know me. And I know if I see the whole contract and the whole plan and there's something that I don't like, I'm going to try to renegotiate. Like, I don't know that I want to do that. And you may think, well, you're a spiritual life coach. You tell people to take risk all the time. Doesn't mean that any of it is easy for other people or for me. We are human. Within our humanness, it means I like to do what is comfortable. I don't like to be in pain. I don't want to be hurt. I don't want to be in unfamiliar places or spaces. Like, there are some people who are thrill seekers who love to, jump out of airplanes and climb mountains and do things where they don't know what the outcome is going to be. They're hoping, I'm jumping out this airplane, I'm climbing up this mountain. I'm hoping the experience at the end means I live. We don't have to jump out of an airplane. We don't have to climb a mountain. That experience is happening every single day, because there is not any single one of us who can predict when our end may be coming. And so, living your life not in fear of dying, but the excitement that comes with trusting and surrendering. That's why those people jump out those airplanes. That's why they climb those mountains, for the excitement that it gives. That same excitement It may be unbelievable to you, but that same excitement can happen in the midst of a grief process because we forget that through that process of elimination, that expression of sadness, that expression of love, something new is being developed. Something is being created within you that needs to break some other stuff apart so that you're more spiritually pliable. For any of you who's ever worked with clay, you know if it's left outside too long, it starts to harden, the air gets to it, and it's no longer flexible. In order for us to be spiritually pliable, we have to be broke open. We have to let go. We have to surrender. We're going to go through some of those stages. And it may be happening so rapidly for some, or, might be a little bit slower for others, but it's happening. Some, as Mama Ia say, it's visible to us. Some it's not. Those emotional things are very, very tangible. Are you allowing yourself or giving yourself permission? Are you saying, I understand that for every single tear that I allow myself to cry, it allows me to get closer and closer to the choices and the decisions that come from a place of power instead of a place of suffering, instead of a place of pain. That if I allow myself to grieve the things that were important to me, it also creates an opportunity for me to be more appreciative of what is coming next. I can't imagine that if I was able to have the experience that I've had in that child, I can't imagine that anything could be better than that, but it's always happened. Every single time I've gotten to a plateau where I'm like, this is great, and then it no longer is, the next experience has always been either equally or greater than the previous experience. We don't always remember that. We don't always remember that, or we don't see it that way. And I know for some of us, it's not always that way. Nothing is linear. Sometimes we go from one experience and then we in the valley. Like we are really in the pits. We're like, oh my gosh. But then we forget that we're not down in the valley without experience. We're not down in the valley without learning something and seeing what we are made of. And in, where'd it go? Sacred Contracts, as Caroline Mace goes over the life of Jesus, the life of Muhammad, the life of Buddha, the life of Abraham, you'll see that they have all had that similar experience where it was so difficult, it was so trying, it was so icky, and then it wasn't, because there was a different calling. But also within all of those processes, there was a time of grief. Like, you want me to do what? What is going on right now? I lost what? And I'm supposed to feel how? Ay, ay, ay. It can feel like we're being punished. And one of the hardest things to do is for us to stop seeing grief as a punishment and to see it as a pathway. Because we are all going to have those grieving experiences. You can't get away from it. It's part of the contract. Something is going to break you wide open. Most of the time, it's unexpected. Even with the best of plans in place, even if you think how you're going to feel when people see someone else's experience and they're like, oh, if that was me, I would do this, that, and the other. You don't know until it actually happens how you're going to react. But know this, there will be a reaction. Either you are going to try to control that reaction, or you can do what indigenous people have done all the time, see it as a sacred invitation for you to see how alive you are, how connected you are, and that you have the ability to express yourself in ways that you may not have ever discovered before. So I the more I think about it, the more I'm like, yeah, I really would love to lead a class, a course, an experience on grieving. Um, I did it last year. I'm not quite sure who participated. It was, it's called A Time to Cry for Black women. We go through 8 different emotions that are most profound in the experience of Black women, and what our relationship with those experiences are. What have we learned across our journey? What was taught to us? Remember last week when I talked about primary grief, secondary grief, and being the casualty of someone else's grief? There's also collective grief. It's like, what is our experience with grieving, and how can we transform that for our highest good so that we can see what a spiritual sacredness there is in our tears? Like I said, I've been crying like a baby for the past probably 2 months. I don't even know what I'm crying about anymore at this point, but I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I'm allowing myself to do that. Marissa says we need that. I hope so, because I like making people cry. And not because it's some, salacious thing, because I know what's on the other side of that. So many of us don't give our tears the respect that they deserve. Other people don't give our tears the respect that they deserve. We shouldn't do it to ourselves. We should not do it to ourselves. I mean, we could literally be in the street crying, and there are people who would walk by like, "What's she crying about? What are Black women crying about now?" We shouldn't do that to ourselves. So let's meditate. We got maybe 10 minutes or more. Now would be a good time for us to take some deep breaths. One of the other things that we do upon entry into this realm, breathing, right? Everybody's concerned and worried until the babies that come into the world cry and breathe. We need them to cry and breathe, cry and breathe. That is our first language. We need to communicate with that, with those tools more. Water being a healing element. And the only thing that's going to put out the fire of anger, the fire of sadness, the fire of guilt, whew, we need some water. The other thing about tears that I don't think we always anticipate is how it connects people without words. I don't know about y'all, but if I see someone else crying, I'm right there with you. I don't need to know what you're crying about. It may not ever ask you. Crying together is one of those experiences that needs no language, but we all know what it means. Um, we all know what it means. And so I think it's an honor when people are able to do that with you and for you. Um, Sometimes, and I know I've had this experience when I couldn't cry for my else, but I know that other people were crying for me. And for that, I am grateful. Whew, sometimes in the midst of our deepest grief, we can't always connect to how we're feeling because we're in shock. Sometimes when words have lost us or we have lost the words, our tears are the only thing that are a demonstration of what is going on internally. And as we continue to breathe and think about that doorway, that pathway, whatever your door looks like, whatever your path looks like, your path could be cobblestones, could be cement, could be dirt, could be some gravel, could be grass. It could even be, for those of us who feel like we live in other planes, it could be clouds. You literally could have a pathway through the clouds, a journey that takes you to places that you never expected. And along the way, there are entities, energies, spirits, if you will, who are willing to guide you through that experience. Mm. Whatever your pathway looks like, who will be there to meet you and to guide you and to hold your hand? Sometimes when we are in the midst of grief and we feel so alone, we can't think of who will be there with me, who will be on the other side of this pain, of this suffering, preparing to meet me with their arms spread wide. I would like to acknowledge and imagine that the people that I've had profound relationships with are along that pathway. And that as I am grieving and crying and trying to hold on and keep the pieces together, that they are there saying, you know what, it's okay to let go because we're going to support you. Because who else has the most experience in transitioning but those who have transitioned? The ultimate transition out of these earthly bodies. And what that must mean. Many of us who have experienced grief through death may not have thought about what it meant for that person to let go. You know, so many of us fight so hard to remain in places and spaces that we have grown out of. What must it have meant to literally give up your human life experience? If anyone is going to provide support, then I think I would want to go there first. There are those of us whose primary occupation in or role, let me say that, whose role in other people's lives may be a bridge to help them from one place to another place. You might be in that role as a spouse, you may be in that role as a sister, sibling, you may be in that role as a parent, as an elder, you may be in that role in your occupation or in your personal life where you assist others with moving from one state of being to another. Whether you acknowledge it or not, whether you recognize it or not, it could come through your words, your gestures. You could have very well been the person to have left things in a particular order so that the person coming in behind you isn't as lost and confused. In that role where you have had to support, whether you knew it or not, someone else in letting go, what things were most important? Was it order and organization? Was it information? Was it moral support, financial support, emotional support? Was it you exposing the truth so that whomever might be going from one place to another knows what they are walking into? There are so many different ways in which we all support each other in transition. Now, consider for a moment that as you were supporting, as you were facilitating, as you were cultivating in that role, that person was grieving. And you may not have known it. You may not have known how hard it was for that person to go from one relationship to another, one job to another, but you did it anyway. It wasn't dependent upon how heartbroken they were, how much they were suffering. You just did it. You may not have even considered that your actions made that transition easier. And how many of us are willing to do that for ourselves? When it comes to the organization, when it comes to the planning, when it comes to the emotional support, financial support, how many of us are willing in our grief journey as we go from one thing to another, are just willing to support just because, so that we are no longer stuck fighting for something that is asking to be let go, that is asking to be released. The reason why we're frustrated, the reason why it's so hard, the reason why we just keep having the same experience over and over is because we're fighting so hard to keep something that's not supposed to be kept. Because it is time for its elimination period, and we keep holding on. And are we willing to say that I'm willing to do whatever I need to support myself as I am grieving, as I am moving from one experience to another, that I'm willing to see this as a sacred opportunity instead of the place where I suffer, that I'm willing to meet my grief and hopefully get to a point where I say, thank you for showing me what I needed to see. Sometimes our brokenness is exactly what needs to happen so that we are in a position to make choices and decisions that we would not have made otherwise. I do not, and we do not, wish upon anyone the experience of brokenheartedness, but we know it is an experience that we will all go through. And if there is anything within us consciously or unconsciously that is creating heartbreak for another that goes against the will of the divine, let us be responsible. and accountable for our actions so that we are not causing harm. But let us also be mindful that we might be part of the heartbreaking process. That might be our role. That might be the position we play, whether we want to play it or not, because something greater is at hand. I am certain that if Abraham's son had anything to say about it, he would not want to be on the slab getting ready to be slaughtered. But that was the part that the divine decided that he would play because of his importance in his father's life. And because of the need for that sacred contract to unfold in the way it unfolded, he became part of that contract. And so many of us are a part of someone's grief, and we may not recognize it or acknowledge it, but or if we do, we may not want to carry the responsibility of that. I know, I know, because I've been told that I have been the part of other people's grief journey. And all that I can say about that is, of course, it was not my intention to be. But if that is the part that divine says that I have to play, then I have to make peace with that, as well as people who have been a part of my grief journey, who may not have been, who have maybe not wanted to be willing participants. But here we are. Because perhaps there's a lesson of forgiveness that I have to honor in my sacred contract. Because perhaps there's a lesson of boundaries that I need to learn in my sacred, whatever it is. Because we're all connected, we all become parts of other people's grief journey. I know I've broken my parents' heart before they left this earth. I know I did and said things that probably caused them so much turmoil. It's part of the human experience. You have broken someone's heart and someone has broken yours. Are we willing to look at that differently? Out of all of these, well, I don't want to compare, but I would say that this one right here puts it in a perspective that was unfamiliar to me, but I'm so grateful for the perspective of grief. And that if my heart has to be broken, then please let me learn something from it. Ain't no way I'm trying to go through all of that and I don't learn something from it. Can you imagine your heart being broken wide open and then you try to repair it and it's right back in the same way that it was before it got broken? Yikes. Woo. I hope we also recognize that as we talk about grief, it's not just these pockets that happen, that there are other experiences going on too. You know, if I'm in the midst of grieving, I can also be in the midst of creative energy. Like I could be creating something that's bringing me joy. You know, grandbaby girl's about to come over here and she don't know that grandma been crying for the past 2 days. But if I happen to cry in front of her, I hope I have enough courage to tell her I'm sad about something and that it's okay to be sad. Because what a gift to be able to give her, that she knows that her tears are valid. Whew. And so I hope for each and every single one of us as we are counting down and coming down to the end of the year, we create a more comfortable relationship with grief. And so we don't feel like there's something wrong with us because we're sad. Now, I will say, if it's challenging for you to move out of that sadness, to take care of yourself, to take care of responsibilities, your daily responsibilities, then you probably need additional support. But if you are walking around feeling sad and then trying to rush yourself through it, particularly now, because this is the holiday season, everybody with that godforsaken Christmas music and decorations and pop, 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 and all of that. And I used to enjoy doing that. I don't have it this year. I'm not doing it. I was just listening to Christmas music, which I don't like. There's only particular people that I like singing particular Christmas songs. But the frivolity of the holiday season is beyond me this year. And that's okay. That is okay. I hope that we all get to a level of comfort with our true feeling instead of feeling like we got to push them to the side and push through them. Now, there may be times when, for self preservation, you got to fake it till you make it. You know, if you are in a leadership role and leading people and all of a sudden you crying, everybody's going to be like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, what does this mean for us if the CEO is in there bawling like a baby? There are times when we have to determine the most appropriate place and space for us to freely express. But that same CEO would not be looked upon in the same way if they were having a temper tantrum in their office and was throwing stuff. They'd be like, ooh, we got to be on our P's and Q's because the CEO is angry. But God forbid the CEO be, somewhere having a crying fest. We in this Western world are uncomfortable with tears. And I also think it has something to do with people not wanting to support people who are sad. What must those Europeans, like, how cold do you have to be to enslave people, hear their wailing, hear their crying, and ignore it, or create even more of it? That's a topic for another day. I don't even want to know what level of evil exists in your consciousness where you see people suffering. And not only do you not try to end that suffering, you're the cause of that suffering and you want to create even more suffering. Why? Because it's easy to control. When you deny people the right to express themselves freely, it's easier to control them. That's a whole nother conversation for, listen, Marissa, hand in mother effing hand, as the great Samuel L. Jackson would say, hand in hand. When you look beyond people's grief, then you don't have to see them as human. But I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you see people crying. I don't know how you see people suffering and you think that ain't got nothing to do with me, particularly when you are the one contributing to it. But again, that's all. We mm, 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 mm. So we can't afford to do that to ourselves. We cannot afford to do that to ourselves. Oh, there go the broken glasses. We cannot afford to do that to ourselves where we are dehumanizing ourselves by not allowing grief to live and breathe and embrace it and say, I have a right to be sad because This is a profound loss in my life. I don't care. And I think I've said it before. If it was somebody stole your pencil in the third grade and you still thinking about it, it's relative to your human experience what that loss is. And we don't have to, fight one another and say, well, I've lost more than you. It's all relative to our own personal experience. But you've seen what happens and what's required. What is required of you to deny the humanity of another person? What you have to give up. What you have to give up, which is, another conversation for another day, which we see being played out. Like, I don't. That's a too high of a price to pay if I have to ignore the humanity of other people. That price is too high to pay. But people are paying it every day. Like, I don't want to think about people suffering. I don't want to think about people in pain, particularly if I'm the one causing it. I'm the one not paying people a fair wage. I'm about to rant. So join me in the evolved community. As we get closer and closer to the end of this year, my time in this space on YouTube is coming to an end. December 29th will be the end of that. Before December 29th, I'm going to be with Marissa on her channel, December 27th. If y'all are not already following Marissa, I don't know what you're doing. But join us on the 27th. So we can prepare ourselves for this new experience. Here we are talking about elimination and shedding old identities. What better way to set ourselves up for success? What better way than for us to talk about some things that are necessary for our journey? I have got so much more information about that. Y'all see that? December 27th, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Put it on your calendar now on Marissa's channel, Marissa Price Heals. I have a process that I go through personally to talk about the spiritual principles that I will focus on throughout the year. This year, as I'm looking at my board, there definitely was, and still will be, some spiritual growth, study. I, the subject I studied this year was me, and I'm still doing a deep study on who I am, and then harmony. I Harmony is not cheap. Harmony is not cheap, and along with everything that we've talked about today, I'm still asking myself, am I willing to pay for the harmony that I so deserve and desire in my life? I'm still answering that question, particularly with the decisions that I'm making over the next couple of weeks. Um, and so we'll talk about that on the 27th. Some things that you can do, some rituals that you can engage in that may help you create an opening process for yourself. I don't know if there are particular things that you already do. I know that Black people, we're going to make our greens and our black eyed peas. We're going to do our laundry. We're going to do all of those things. But there are some other things that we can do to prepare for a new experience, because that's really what the new year, it's a new experience. We don't know what's going to happen next year. We can try to predict. We don't know. But if we create an intention for ourselves and for each other, collectively, then it doesn't have to be so scary. And so I hope to see y'all on the 27th. We will be back here in this space next Sunday on the 22nd, then the 29th, and then I'm going to keep the YouTube channel open, but I won't be doing Sunday meditation on that YouTube. It'll happen in the Evolved community. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for sharing tears, sharing love, sharing yourself, sharing your energy. I love y'all. Continue to have an amazing rest of your day. And as you continue through your own journey with grief through this week, don't run from it. Don't run from it. Embrace it. Say, you know what? I'm sad for a good darn reason. This is an appropriate response. Don't let anybody tell you that your grief, your tears are not appropriate. You know why you're crying. You know why you're grieving. And it doesn't have to make sense to anyone but you. I love y'all. Hope to see you next week. Um, I hope to see y'all next week. And thank you. You have no idea how this is helping me through my grieving journey. Or maybe you do, because I hope it's helpful for you as well. I love y'all. I hope so. I hope so. That is the intention. That is the intention. I love y'all. Enjoy the rest of your week.